News just coming in. Top Kashmiri terrorist Zakir Musa, who'd founded the Al-Qaeda's Kashmir terror unit, he's suspected to have been trapped in South Kashmir. There is an operation that is currently underway in and around Pulwama. Zakir Musa, if you'd recall, the man you see on your television screen, he'd rebelled against the Hizbul Mujahideen leadership and launched his own Al-Qaeda Kashmir unit. Terrorists who asked people in Jammu and Kashmir to fight for an Islamic caliphate and not for Azadi. Now he's believed to be trapped along with 3 other terrorists in the Norpura area, where a cordon has been laid and cordon and search operations are currently underway. Now there are conflicting reports. Some reports seem to indicate that he may have given the security forces a slip, but unless the cordon and search operation is over and that area sanitized, security forces say the cordon will remain in. So top Kashmiri terrorist Zakir Musa is trapped by the security forces in Pulwama in South Kashmir. Zakir Musa had recently rebelled against the Hizbul Mujahideen terrorist organization and had launched his own terrorist outfit affiliated with Al-Qaeda. He called it Al-Qaeda Kashmir. This terrorist commander is believed to be trapped along with 3 other terrorists in the Norpura area of South Kashmir. So from what security forces are telling India today, the initial information was that there are 4 terrorists who were seen moving around in an area based on specific intelligence. The army, the CRPF and the Special Operations Group of the Jammu and Kashmir Police mounted an operation. And why are we showing you an image of that man in a turban? Because Zakir Musa is also seen as a master of disguise. He's learned to have disguised himself in the past and escaped. And I quickly want to cut across to India Today's Ashraf Vani, who joins us with the latest on the story. Ashraf, is the cordon still in place? Is the firing on, or just search operations?
Basically, cordon is still on, and it is a massive cordon search operation, which is not only conducted by a selected security forces. There are 2 special operation groups, one from Pampur, one from Avantipora, and also the troops from 42 Rashtriya Rifles, and including the troops from the CRPF, 2 battalions of CRPF, in fact. The area has been cordoned off. There is a tough resistance being faced by the security forces, as locals continuously are protesting and demonstrating and erecting stones on the security forces. The area has been now widened, and there are, you mentioned earlier in the bulletin, that Zakir Musa, who is the top most wanted militant for the security agencies in the Kashmir, after the commander was killed earlier and was told before his death that he was also associated with Zakir Musa. Basically, here is very important to understand for the people as well as for the viewers that why Zakir Musa is so much and most wanted for the security agencies in the Kashmir, that he is not only gaining the popularity among the sympathizers in the Kashmir Valley, but even the most faction of Hizbul Mujahideen is bent towards him. That was clear during last 2 encounters. 5 militants have been killed during the last 1 week. All 5 were the associates of Zakir Musa.
That's very interesting. Yes, you're saying that in the past week, the 2 operations that were mounted in which 5 terrorists were killed, they were from the Zakir Musa faction, and now Zakir Musa trapped. So tell me this, is the information coming from rival terror gangs? Is that what is happening, a fratricide, a gang war? Especially because Zakir Musa is seen now as perhaps the most popular terrorist because he talks more of establishing an Islamic caliphate and not just Azadi.
Gaurav, yes, that is a fact. There is the rivalry between the militant groups that was visible by the statements which were issued by the Hizbul commander himself on the video, in where he warned without naming Zakir Musa that these are the people who are not fighting for the Kashmir. Even same kind of statements were seen and heard by the Zakir Musa when he took the rebel against the Hizbul Mujahideen, which is being considered as the largest militant group operating in the Kashmir Valley. That means that whether any full voltage group has given information to the security forces or someone, as their practice with the security forces, inside the module to bust back, because the way in which the security forces are succeeding in the operations, and during the last 1 year, more than 100 militants have been killed. That means the grip of forces is and that is why they are getting these kinds of information.
Ashraf, keep tracking that story. I will come back to you for more. There's more breaking news that's coming in on the broadcast. There appears to be a big development taking place on the India-China front when it comes to the Doklam standoff. Sources are telling India Today that today there was a meeting between officials of the Indian Army and the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army, barely 30 kilometers from the Doklam standoff. This was a scheduled border defense management meeting at Nathula. This is barely 30 kilometers from the Doklam plateau. This meeting was scheduled. There were discussions that were held. It is hoped this will lead to a thaw, though not much is filtering out as what transpired in this meeting. I want to cut across to India Today's Geeta Mohan for more on the story. Geeta is in Kathmandu. She's getting us the latest on the BIMSTEC meet also. Geeta, this meeting that is taking place, so there is an intense standoff that remains, yet officials continue to meet. Is that a positive sign?
Well, it is just the dichotomous nature that we've seen of the Chinese side, Gaurav. Nothing more than that, given that despite that meeting, we're seeing very harsh statements that continue to come from the Chinese Foreign Ministry, as also from various Chinese diplomats and experts, including the Chinese papers and Chinese mouthpieces, which just goes to show that China, on the one hand, is trying to show that they are engaging to de-escalate, but on the other hand, are upping the ante by talking about war. This even as the India-Bhutan bilateral took place over here in Kathmandu, where both sides did discuss the issue of Doklam, and the Foreign Minister of Bhutan has made it very clear, amply clear, that there has to be only peaceful and amicable solution to the crisis that ensues in Doklam. The meeting that took place between the Chinese and the Indian forces at very close to Doklam is one way of seeing that the Chinese side are trying to gauge how India is looking at the entire crisis and what India is going to do or planning on doing. Look at how they're engaging the journalists, Gaurav, in showing their own preparedness.
Stay with me for a moment. Let me also bring in Sushant Sareen for more on this, Geeta. Sushant Sareen is a strategic affairs analyst. He is studying this very closely, as is Brigadier Gurmeet Kanwal, who will join us in a moment. Sushant Sareen, how do you view this meeting between officials of the Indian Army and the Chinese Army, the Border Defense Management Team meeting at Nathula?
Well, you know, like your report says that this was a fairly routine meeting, but the point is that these are not normal circumstances between India and China, especially in that particular sector. So if the Chinese come for a routine meeting, now we don't know what has transpired in that meeting.
Not yet, at least.
As Geeta says, maybe the Chinese wanted to feel around how the Indians are looking at the situation, but I think the Indians used the occasion to also gauge how the Chinese are looking at the situation. And clearly, it is true that there is this dichotomous kind of a policy that the Chinese are following. But I would imagine, maybe because I'm being a little optimistic on this whole thing, that I would see it as not exactly a thaw, but a positive mood, because for a very simple reason, that if you were actually heading into some kind of a conflict-like situation, then perhaps one of the strongest messages the Chinese would have given at this point in time is to call off a routine meeting, you know, and also breathe fire. If they haven't done that, I would think that with all the rhetoric which is flowing and which is actually quite counterproductive even from a Chinese point of view, with all the rhetoric that is, I think it makes sense for us to see this move as a positive step.
Good indicator that fact that that meeting is taking place, also the fact that recently an Indian Navy team was in Beijing, was in China, and Navy to Navy contact, sporting contacts are still on. The Indian Navy team won a bronze medal. We'll talk about that in greater detail. But for a moment, I want to shift focus from the military aspect to the diplomatic aspect, because that is where the focus should be to bring tensions down. So Sushma Swaraj, External Affairs Minister, she's in Kathmandu for the BIMSTEC meet. Now, Sushma Swaraj met her counterpart from Bhutan in Kathmandu. What we are now being told is that Bhutan has, for the first time, officially said on camera to India today that they are hoping that there will be a peaceful resolution through dialogue of the Doklam standoff. India Today's Geeta Mohan with this report.
As China continues to rant and rave over Doklam and refuses to withdraw from the disputed area, India and Bhutan put their heads together to find a way to tackle the dragon.
The bilateral meeting between External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj and her Bhutanese counterpart here in Kathmandu focused on the border standoff at the India-China-Bhutan tri-junction. And the Bhutanese foreign minister emphasized that only an amicable and peaceful solution could resolve the situation in Doklam.
We discussed with the minister. We hope that the situation in Doklam will be resolved peacefully and amicably.
The meeting came on a day when China again issued a threat, saying it will not budge an inch backwards in Doklam, and then continued to warn India of serious military consequences if it doesn't withdraw from Doklam. They are prepared, Delhi warned Beijing. Just hours after India and Bhutan's meeting in Nepal, signs of a possible thaw emerged as Indian and Chinese officials met in Nathula, a few kilometers from Ground Zero Doklam. The first senior-level engagement in nearly 2 months raised hopes of a solution. With Geeta Mohan in Kathmandu, Bureau Report, India Today.
Brigadier Gurmeet Kanwal is with the Institute of Defence Studies and Analyses, and he's been looking at the China situation very closely. Brigadier Kanwal, how do you read this situation? There is a standoff. Bhutan has now come out and said that it hopes for a peaceful resolution through dialogue. And India-China officials, they meet, army officers, they meet at Nathula. Can we see this as perhaps signs of a thaw?
I think the early signs of a thaw are in the air, Gaurav. It will take some time. It might continue till the Communist Party conference that is coming up in November of China. But the early signs of a thaw are certainly in the air.
Okay, so early signs of a thaw. Can the situation deteriorate, or Geeta, is there diplomacy between India and China and Bhutan and China to ensure that the situation doesn't deteriorate any further and can be contained and perhaps gradually improved?
Well, one country that is most worried in the entire tensions that ensue at the border is Bhutan. And is the reason why, Gaurav, we had to try so many times to get a response from the foreign minister of Bhutan. They were really not wanting to speak. They really wanted to stay away from the entire crisis or the media glare when it comes to this entire crisis. But the fact is that India and Bhutan have made it very clear that engagement is the only way forward, and there can be no warmongering or, for that matter, calling out for war or using the kind of words that and language that China has been using. Despite that, China continues its harsh language, Gaurav. And while we are seeing engagements and meetings at various levels, one will have to wait and see whether if Xi Jinping can really afford to a troop withdrawal or afford to a loss of face ahead of that Congress, that very important Congress that Gurmeet Kanwal was mentioning. And that really points to the fact that right now it's only India and Bhutan that are focused on engagement with China and de-escalation of tensions.
But India and China, India and Bhutan are the aggrieved parties, Brigadier Kanwal, if I may, considering that China has come into Bhutanese territory. That is something that Bhutan's made it very clear, and Bhutan has reiterated that. So with Bhutan reiterating that China is coming into a disputed territory, hoping for a peaceful resolution, hoping for dialogue, will this compel China to step back from the very belligerent talk, or will they continue with their very shrill rhetoric, sir?
China has tried to unilaterally change the status quo on the ground. The Chinese and the Bhutanese have been discussing this area, the tri-junction, for the last 20 years. And suddenly, out of the blue, China has made a road up to the plateau and tried to change the situation on the ground unilaterally. That is not acceptable, and China has to realize that, and eventually they will.
Eventually they will. So, which means, Sushant Sareen, this could well be a long-drawn deployment at Doklam plateau, but sources seem to indicate that there is some talk that there could be true production on either side as a confidence-building measure, or perhaps either party could step back a little so that there is no accidental situation that leads to an escalation.
Yes, I think if, as and when the Chinese get off the high horse that they have climbed, I think that is the sensible way, and that is the only way that this de-escalation will take place. And it might take a few months, if at all, maybe even longer. But I think, the Chinese need to understand one thing. They cannot force a situation and then say that, sorry, we can't back down because we will lose face. Before they force a situation, they should, understand that if the situation goes awry, they will stand to lose face. Now, in this particular case, this whole bit about the 19th Party Congress, and the Chinese have been doing this for donkey's years, that, they take a certain stand, and then please understand that we will lose face, so you must back down. I'm afraid that's not going to wash down anybody's throat anymore. Okay. So, and if the Chinese were to instigate a conflict with India, and they get a very, very bloody nose after that, then what happens to the 19th Party Congress? So I am not entirely convinced that, Xi Jinping would want to take that kind of a chance at this point in time. Perhaps after the 19th Party Congress, he might. But before that, can you imagine if, another Vietnam 1979 happens to the Chinese against India, what that leaves of Xi Jinping, who wants to become not just the president for this 5-year term, but even the next one. Okay. So I would think that the sensible thing for the Chinese to do is lower down the rhetoric and then get into some back-channel talks and gradually diffuse the situation.
Okay.
The reasons as well.
Yes. Go on, sir.
The track record indicates that since 1967 at Nathula we had a firing incident where there were a large number of casualties, mostly on the Chinese side. There has been no firing incident since 1967.
Yes.
Also,
absolutely.
I like to think of it as stability at the strategic level, but relative instability at the tactical level, instability that is political, diplomatic and military, transgressions, refusal of visas, loosely visas, and all the rhetoric that is emanating from Beijing at the moment. So the track record is that there has been no firing since 1967. Also, the second and more important reason is that China, through Tumbi Valley, to Dokala and the tri-junction,
yes,
China is at the absolutely end of the tether of its logistics. And if there is any place at which China cannot fight India, it is at the end of the southern end of the Tumbi Valley. So that's the last place they would like to get into a firefight.
Okay.
Yes, they can open another front in Ladakh, in Arunachal Pradesh, but what reason do they have?
Exactly.
What justification will they have to do that?
What's the wider game plan should they attempt to do that? So, Geeta, the armed forces say they did what was required at that point of time to protect India's national interests. Now the ball is in the diplomat's court. It's for diplomacy to take over. And where is that at this point of time? Is it being handled at the Ministry of External Affairs or at the level of the National Security Advisor at the Prime Minister's office, Geeta?
Well, both, Gaurav, and they have worked in tandem. It isn't like the armed forces worked without the Ministry of External Affairs having known as to what is really happening in Doklam, a tri-junction that is absolutely sensitive for India as it is for Bhutan, given that Siliguri corridor is important for both. And like you're rightly pointing out, now it is for diplomats to deal with it. Diplomats in Beijing are engaged with the Foreign Office in China.
Okay.
And what China is doing is, because of, I think, Gaurav, the miscalculation that we see, China is absolutely riled. They haven't done anything, but they've been only threatening, and it is one threat after the other without any movement. So
okay.
I think diplomacy is certainly working at a certain level.
Okay, for the moment, Geeta Mohan, Sushant Sareen and Brigadier Gurmeet Kanwal, many thanks for joining me. Even the Chinese threats day in and day out for close to 60 days, they have diminishing returns. Let's now shift focus and talk about the Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister Mehbooba Mufti, who met the Union Home Minister Rajnath Singh on the issue of the special status to Jammu and Kashmir. She also met Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Parliament. She spoke to journalists after this meeting and said that the Prime Minister's response was positive. She insisted that both Article 370 and 35A have been preconditions in the PDP-BJP alliance.
देखिए हमारा जो एजेंडा ऑफ अलायंस है उसका बेसिस ही ये है कि जो 370 है उस पे स्टेटस को मेंटेन होना चाहिए, नो फिडलिंग विद स्टेटस को. सो दैट फॉर्म्स द बेसिस ऑफ आवर एजेंडा. सो none of us can go against that. प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने एजेंडा ऑफ अलायंस से पूरा 100% एश्योरेंस दिया हमको.
But is it time for Article 370 and 35A? If not to go, at least a relook and a debate. We will track that story very closely. But that is all I have time for on India First this evening. Many thanks for watching. News and updates continue on India Today. Stay with us.